Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's November 1st, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host today. We can take your questions and comments. You can email them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the YouTube chat room. Now, Helga, in the promo we sent out announcing the webcast today, you referred to the horrors in Southwest Asia as stemming in the modern period from the Bernard Lewis plan, Lewis being a British historian and intelligence figure who promoted the use of religious differences and conflict as the basis of as a British imperial scheme to divide and conquer to maintain British imperial control. But you also referred to a very different philosophical outlook, that of Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa in the middle of the 15th century, who presented a vision of perpetual peace that could be constituted based on the concordance of all religions. Given the disasters that have been unleashed in Gaza following the October 7th Hamas raid and the Israeli response, how could this method of Cusa provide a solution today?
Well, I think it may be difficult to imagine because I must say that anybody who is looking what is happening at this point in Gaza, this is just unbelievable in terms of, you know, I think it's really important that people do not push it aside because, the killing which is going on under the pretext of getting rid of Hamas, bombing refugee camps and defenseless civilians, killing thousands of children. The world has to wake up because, I really want to say that the enormousness of what is going on is very, very difficult to cope with. And I would really urge people who are listening to this broadcast, to engage in actually what is happening and not brush it aside with the idea, whatever ready-made opinions you may have, because I think that this is really the test of morality of mankind if we can stop this. I think the fact that the UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk just sent in his resignation because he said that, once again, the United Nations proved to be powerless in front of this. And then he says that he has been involved in, observing and dealing with many genocides. He said he was involved with the genocide against the Tutsis, the Bosnian Muslims, the Yazidi, the Rohingya, but that this is by far the worst. And I want to read you a whole quote of what he said. He said, "This is a textbook case of genocide. The European ethno-nationalist settler colonial project in Palestine has entered its final phase towards the expedited destruction of the last remnants of indigenous Palestinian life in Palestine. What's more, the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe are wholly complicit in the horrific assault. Not only are these governments refusing to meet their treaty obligations to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions, but they are in fact actively arming the assault, providing economic and intelligence support, and giving political and diplomatic cover for Israel's atrocities." Now, I think this is very important because it has been created a climate where, in some places like Germany, for example, you cannot even discuss these things anymore. And now slowly it starts to change. But for the first days of what happened, there was a complete gag order. You could not express any concern for the plight of the Palestinians without being accused of being anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. And the two things are not the same thing. In Israel, the support for the Gaza invasion dropped from 69% after October 7th to now somewhere around 20%. So the Israeli population is not behind that. So I think it's really important that we mobilize the population, because this has to stop. There has to be a worldwide mobilization of people who are stepping in, because if we don't stop it, it does have the potential to lead to the end of civilization, because we are on the verge of World War III. I mean, it's very obvious that the whole Southwest Asian region is a powder keg. There are already reports that, some other countries are involved one way or another, be it that Israel bombed targets in Syria, be it that bombs came or missiles or drones came from Yemen to Israel. I cannot verify any of these, but it is very clear that we are sitting on a complete powder keg. There are many politicians who now basically talk about a new axis of evil, involving Iran. And it is very clear that the moment Iran would be involved in this conflict, all charts are off. I mean, we are on the verge of a total escalation. A very important Russian, his name is Fyodor Lukyanov. He's the chairman of the Council of Foreign and Defense Policy, and also the program director of the Valdai Club. He basically said this is already a new world war. And he also noted that this is the breakdown of the international order, that the previous order, which was characterized by mutual assured destruction, actually, especially in the Cold War period when the Soviet Union still existed, the conflicts, could be managed, because it was clear that mutual assured destruction was a deterrence for anybody to engage in an escalation. But that has broken down. And he says that he doesn't see anymore even a temporary approach to settlement. And I think that's a quite accurate description. I mean, it's very clear that what is really behind all of that is completely different. It's not about Ukraine. It's not about Southwest Asia. Sure, the predicates of these conflicts are extremely important and they play a role. But I think President Putin, in a meeting with some security people, said, these are geopolitical manipulations which are really behind all of that. And I think that is absolutely true, because what's really at stake is that you have a collapsing old order, the idea of an unipolar world where the West would be the dominant force, and the global South would have no role. I mean, that is changing. That is irreversibly changed, because you have the emergence of a new system of economic relations with the BRICS plus the global South countries working with these countries, and the absolute desperate attempt by the forces of the West to prevent such a new order from taking control of the situation. So I think we are in the most dangerous moment in the history of mankind ever. The old order is breaking apart. A new order is emerging, but it's not yet settled. And as long as the West is desperately trying to contain the emergence of such a new order, I think we are on the verge of a complete catastrophe. And, I think that we really have to have a mobilization where everybody should join peace demonstrations. It's not about taking sides. We have to catapult the whole situation into a new geometry, a new paradigm. And I think, what I have proposed, the moment the special military operation in Ukraine started, the war in Ukraine, which is now more than 1.5 years ago, I called for a new paradigm, a new international security and development architecture, because it was clear that you cannot settle things within the old order by nature, because that's the way how this thing is breaking apart. You need to move to a new security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. Now, applied to the Ukraine crisis, this means you have to take care of the security interest of Ukraine, but also of Russia. In Southwest Asia, it means you have to take into account the security interest of Israel, but also of Palestine, also of Iran, also of the other countries in the region. And that jump to understand the lessons of the Peace of Westphalia, that peace is only possible if you take care of the interest of the other, that has, for many regions of the world, like Europe, gone completely absent. Nobody is thinking that way anymore. Germany says we are on the side of Israel, no matter what. Well, that does not serve Israel well, because as you can see, that what the pathway which is now started, or which is now put into motion, could lead to a complete catastrophe for everybody. So you are not doing anybody a favor by pushing that. The same is true essentially for the situation in Ukraine. So I think it's high time to discuss the new security and development architecture. And I really challenge people to start to enter into a discussion process with us. How can we promote that? How can we get a couple of countries, a couple of universities, a couple of think tanks to actually start to discuss how can we give ourselves an order which allows the survival of mankind? Or are we so stupid that we pursue the pathway to our own extinction? I'm an optimist, and therefore I think it can be done, but it requires, the mobilization of a lot of people around the globe.
Well, we're getting a number of questions coming in following what happened with the UN General Assembly vote last week. There is a professor from Pakistan, Mushtaq Mirani, who said, put pressure on the Western countries to bring Israel and Arab countries to a table to find a lasting peace accord. There is no other option. The Middle East needs sustainable peace. That's very much along the lines of what you're saying. But here's a question that came from the United Kingdom. He writes, the calls for a ceasefire in the UN General Assembly, calls for a peace conference from China, from Lula, from Erdogan, from the US Catholic Bishops' Conference, now from the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, combined with the growing demonstrations around the world. And he mentioned, I think, 30 to 50,000 in London. He said that none of these will influence Netanyahu, including the demonstrations against him in Israel. But will any of these please move the Biden administration?
Well, I think it depends on the escalation of such demonstrations and peace demands. As long as the present administration is convinced that they can get away with, they will continue to pursue this policy of no ceasefire, at a point where it is so clear that if you don't have a ceasefire, the thing will absolutely explode. So, I think we need an even stronger voices. For example, it's very good that these different religious leaders are coming into the situation, because there is a historic precedent, and that was when Mohammed II conquered Istanbul in 1453. This was an outcry everywhere in the West, because this was regarded as a big clash of civilization, like an early form of what Bernard Lewis is trying, or has been trying to, promote as one of these geopolitical string pullers Putin was talking about. Because at that point, the Christian world was, convinced that this was a barbarian attack. From the Muslim side, it naturally looked very different, but there was bloodshed, and it was a huge shock under the impact of the, horrible killings and things like that. Nicholas of Cusa, who was the, basically great mind of the 15th century, he not only wrote many of the writings which developed this new method of the coincidence of opposite as an approach to think about situations. He wrote a beautiful dialogue in the form of a Platonic dialogue called De Pace Fidei, where he had 17 representatives of different religions and nations to approach God, the Logos, the Verbum, and they all said, "Look, God, we are all killing each other in your name. Can you not help us? How we can find a way out of it?" And then God developed this very beautiful idea that people have to start thinking as philosophers to differentiate between the one truth, the one God, and the different prophets and the different traditions. And in the end, in the dialogue, basically, God tells the representatives of these different religions to go out and teach their people that there is this higher one, the higher truth. And I would urge all of you, please read this dialogue of Nicholas of Cusa, De Pace Fidei, about peace in religion or peace in faith, because I think that is a method which, if the religious leaders of the world would strongly all join in talking about this. President Biden is a Catholic. He talked with the Pope. Afterwards, he said that the Pope totally agreed with him. But I was looking at the printout of the Vatican of that discussion, and the Pope said something very different. The Pope said an immediate ceasefire. So all the Catholics should really, point to Biden the fact that he did not, that the Pope did not agree with him. So I think there are a lot of more things, but it needs really a lot more mobilization and the heart blood of everybody to stop this.
Now we're getting questions on tactical strategies and how to reverse the situation. One from Paul from the UK. He said, "How do we defeat the organized corruption of European governments?" There was another one who said, "There's no European government that's acting in the interests of its people. What can we do about that?" And then from the US, an American observer said, "Watching Austin and Blinken, the defense secretary and the secretary of state, yesterday in congressional testimony for the Biden 105 billion proposal for more money." He said, then he watched the Republicans who said, well, they want to have a separate vote on the Israel portion of that so they can push it through. And he asked, don't these Republicans see they're being manipulated by the same military industrial complex that's been funding to keep funding permanent wars? So you said the thing that has to be done is mobilize, but do you have any other ideas on how this can get across that the governments are committing policies that go against the interests of their own nations?
Well, I think the population knows that already, because all of this militarization, in Europe, it's going on. The defense minister of Germany, Pistorius, he called for Germany to be war ready. The German word is kriegstüchtig. He didn't say to be ready for defense. He said kriegstüchtig. Now people should really be alarmed. This is a language which has nothing to do with the tradition of the social democracy, which did have problems in the past. Like the Social Democrats were on the wrong side when it came to the mobilization for war credit before World War One. So then I'm not saying that they have a holy history, but this is really playing into the worst kind of militarization of Europe. And then, people are pushing the special budget for the Bundeswehr, it's the same thing like the 105 billion in the United States. This goes off the social expenditures. That means no infrastructure, no hospitals, nothing. Naturally, the migrants are the big target now, as if they would be the cause of the problem. They're another group of victims. So I think that people have to really get mobilized to understand that if they do not act right now on their own interest, the governments think that they have impunity, and they're driven by the knowledge that the financial system they base their power on is on the verge of collapsing. And the military industrial complex is obviously they are the only ones who make profit right now, but that doesn't function. I mean, look at it. The United States backing for the Ukraine war and the European governments, did that lead to the Ukrainian winning the counteroffensive? No, it's now even acknowledged in the Western media that the Ukraine practically lost the war. And even if you send many more weapons, they don't have the men anymore because, the population is limited. The casualties were very high. And, basically, Scott Ritter has a new article where he says the US or the West, NATO lost the war already. And it's now proven that the Russian military is the strongest military in the world. Now, in terms of nuclear weapons, that's for sure true. And, the Russian economy is now better off than before the war broke out, contrary to the West. The West, Germany is collapsing. The latest is that Russia can produce 100 to 120 missiles every month now. They have a full-fledged war economy. But all military production, in the final analysis, is a destruction of physical wealth, which goes at the expense of the population. So, look at the different wars after 9/11. You had Afghanistan, you had Iraq, Libya, Syria. Where are all of these countries? Was any one of these situations won for the West? No. In 2021, the US and NATO went out of Afghanistan, not so honorable, I must say. They were defeated. Ukraine, they were defeated. I mean, look at this. The interventionist wars in all of these countries in Southwest Asia were utter complete failures. Did they improve the reputation of the West among these countries or in the rest of the world? No, the opposite has happened. The global South countries have turned away from that. And, I think that if there's any reason in some of these establishment figures, review, was this policy successful? Obviously not. And then have the courage and intellectual integrity to basically change the policy. I think that if the United States at this point and the European countries would just quietly, change gears and say, we cooperate with the countries of the global South to build a new economic system, I think no questions would be asked. Everybody would be happy, and, the principle of the Peace of Westphalia, that for the sake of peace, you have to forgive all the crimes which were committed by the one or the other side, that, maybe you cannot forget it, but you can forgive it, and then move on to building a new system afterwards. And I think that is the only pathway. And we have to somehow see if there are not people belonging to the so-called establishment who can think this way and are willing, like this UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk. He said, I will not stand for this policy anymore. And I think this is the kind of action which I think is required. So let's work with us to find these individuals who have the courage to change policy before it is too late.
And I'll suggest that people look for demonstrations that are going on. There are many going on all over the world. If you can't find one, start one. And we have from someone in the UK who signed in as Jughead, uh, gave €10 or £10 to what we're doing. Get our leaflets out, contribute to our movement. There are many things you can do to join this mobilization, but it's, as Helga is emphasizing, silence is not an option. Now, Helga, we have a couple more questions I want to get to you. One is from Jack Gilroy, who's been involved in the International Peace Coalition, a Catholic social activist in the United States. And he's bringing up the other area of possibly the next war. He said, what needs to be done to prevent the much predicted US war on China? How do we teach Americans that the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is a good challenge to the United States to find useful, peaceful ways to bring economic development without the threat and use of violence to dominate others? How can Americans do what the Belt and Road Initiative is doing to help, not harm our sisters and brothers of the world?
Well, I think first of all, there is a tremendous lack of knowledge about China. And, we recently had a delegation of the Schiller Institute travel for almost 2 weeks to different locations, and they came back and they had their own first-hand view, and they were very excited. Then you had certain German industrialists, they traveled 6 weeks throughout 40 cities in China to get a first-hand impression. And I think the best thing would be that, each group who has the concern that China may be the next place of confrontation, that you send delegations. I think we could very easily ask the Chinese to help us to set up such a fact-finding, people-to-people mission. And, then we could really get a better idea what the policy of China is. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to tell my experience. I have been in China the first time in 1971 and many times in between since. And my whole experience is that China has, contrary to the narrative in the Western media, contributed the largest civilizational contribution of any country I know of, for the simple in the recent history, for the simple reason that they have lifted 850 million people of China out of poverty. And now they are providing, since about 10 years with the Belt and Road Initiative, their success model to countries of the global south, and in this way giving for the first time developing countries the chance to overcome poverty and underdevelopment. And naturally that is more attractive than, just military training or so-called security-related cooperation, which the United States has been offering to these countries. So I think that, people should understand that to help millions and actually hundreds of millions of people to get out of poverty is the best contribution to human rights. Because, when you are poor in Haiti or in Sudan or in some Yemen, or look at the video which was made by the World Food Program about Yemen. There's a very important video called Hunger Ward, which shows you what happens to malnourished children when they are, only a few pounds left before they die. To be hungry, and I think Jean Siegler, who is a very prominent, famous Swiss activist and UN official, he described in his books how dying of hunger is the worst pain, because the organs start to consume themselves, and it's just the worst death you can possibly imagine. So if you help people to not only have one meal, but to have enough food to live a decent life, that's the biggest contribution to human rights you can do. So, China has done that, and all the reports about the so-called suppression and so forth, nobody who ever travels to China comes back with that report, because people are happy and they agree with the government to 80%, while our Western governments have maybe 20, 30, or at best 40% support, which should tell you something. So my suggestion is let's go there, or let's organize for people to go there so that they come back and have a different story. And we should set up more educationals about it, and cultural dialogue. I absolutely believe in a dialogue of civilizations, because only if you know the other culture that you have any way of solving these problems.
Well, the next question is from another part of the world which most Westerners have very little knowledge of, which is from Africa, from Munashe Chiwanza. And he asks a few questions on the global south. I'll just narrow it down to two questions. He asks how the international forums, which we mentioned, the Russian African Economic and Humanitarian Forum, the BRICS Summit, and so on, contribute to the emergence of a new world order from the global south, and how can African countries navigate the changing dynamics of global power to ensure that their voices and interests are represented in the emerging multipolar world order?
Well, I think right now there are extremely interesting changes occurring in Africa. I mean, first of all, in West Africa, there was in the recent period many changes. Several governments have changed their government, which was not liked in the West, but basically there was a complete commitment to get rid of European colonialism. Um, so that's a very new development. Then, many countries are applying for membership in the BRICS Plus. At the recent summit in Johannesburg, 6 countries joined. 2 of them, and they will become full members by January 1st. 2 of them are African. One is Egypt and the other one is Ethiopia. But there are many more who applied for membership. So I think the idea of, first of all, trying to get African unity by, working with the BRICS Plus and other such organizations, that is indeed, I think, the best Africa can do right now. And, I think there is in the entire global south now the absolute commitment to end 600 years of colonialism. And I think that, provided we can solve this present world crisis, which has everything to do with the fact that there is this tectonic change going on, we can, I think the more the countries of the global south are making their voice heard loud and clear, and appeal to, the global north, and say that they should basically, get on board with the new system rather than trying to oppose it. I think that needs to be done in the most powerful way, because, between the United States, NATO, Europe, and Russia and China, the situation is so stuck. But if you take the global south, this is, together with Russia, China, and India, this is already more than 3 billion people. And then you add the other countries of the global south. This is the vast majority of the human species. And you have all the right to make your voice heard. And fortunately, there are a lot of excellent leaders right now who I think, really do have the personality and the format as individuals to guide the world into a better paradigm.
I have a final note here for you, Helga, from someone who writes, thank Helga for her tireless efforts, the leaflets she's writing. Can she say a word of encouragement to those of us who are doing leafleting and sometimes run into a brick wall?
Yeah, I know. I think it's very difficult, because the environment in which we are right now working is it's a war-like propaganda. If some people are saying that the Third World War has already started, in a certain sense, that's true, because the Western governments try to impose a complete control of the narrative. And they're trying to silence every voice who says, maybe you should listen to the other side. To listen to the other side doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with the other side, but if you don't take into account the history, the historical background, the evolution of a conflict, what is the viewpoint of the one side, what is the viewpoint of the other side, how can you ever think to come up with a solution which can hold? I mean, that's the oldest lesson of diplomacy, or any other human collaboration and working together. So, what the West is doing right now, for example, in Germany, I mean, as if we would not have had the experience of Goebbels already once, and we should think that we had enough of that. No, now they have issued a guideline for journalists, what you can say and what you cannot say. So the journalists are being told that they should write always, not that anything happens in Gaza, but that it's in response to the terrorist attack of the terrorist organization Hamas. Now this is happening in Gaza. So the other day I was listening to a journalist in the news program, and then in order to report about what is happening in Gaza, he said, yeah, and Hamas is not even capable of providing food and liquid to their own population. I mean, this place is completely sealed off for ages. People cannot leave. Before the conflict or the war, whatever you call it, broke out, I think there were several hundred trucks per day bringing in food and other necessities for the population. Now it's, maybe 10 or 12, or, it trickles in like a drop on a hot stone. So what is the suffering of the people? They're starving to death. And this journalist jerk, he says the Hamas is not even capable of. The Hamas is, doing whatever they're doing, but it's a complete effort to not portray the situation as it is. So when we are leafleting, obviously, people are in a frenzy, or in a complete fantasy, maybe worried about their job, maybe worried about inflation, maybe, then you have this phenomena that many people are afraid to be overheard, that they could say something which is not the official line. Now, in Germany, more than 80 years ago, there was something which was later called the German view, der deutsche Blick, where people would paranoidly look over their shoulder to see if somebody would hear them, what they were saying. So we are back at this situation where the deutsche Blick is again what is going around, because people are afraid to be overheard saying something which they believe, but they don't want to be heard to be saying. So I think the only way is to be patient. When you leaflet, just be friendly and jokeful, because this is an atmosphere of paranoia and fear, and I think it's important that we are there on the streets, telling people that there is a solution. And I want to reiterate again, we have to fight to get to a new paradigm, overcoming geopolitics. A couple of years ago, I made a New Year's address where I said the most important task was to overcome geopolitics. And I think that has proven to be so true, that the moment you think in terms of geopolitical interest of one group against the geopolitical interest of another group, you are in the game, the Bernard Lewis game, the Brzezinski game, the great game, the idea of manipulation. And I think we have to rise above that and define the interest of the one humanity first. And then you can look at all the concrete problems. But I think that higher level has to be accomplished.
Well, to all our viewers who joined us today, and to those of you who are becoming active and contributing, we'd like to thank you. And Helga, thank you for what you're doing, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, and get active in the meantime with us.